Well, first off, thanks everybody for attending. I know it's an odd day because it's the second Wednesday, but the presentation is called Every Bird, Everywhere, All at Once, which, if you pay attention to movies, is indeed a play on the Oscar-winning movie from last year, in a way. And we'll come full circle to the title eventually. And this first image, which is a collage, we'll also be coming back to it during the presentation. It's basically just the placeholder as we start things off. So with that, we're going to start things off. Well, maybe. Maybe we will. There we go. So first, a bit about me. I live in the East San Jose Foothills, where I manage a small ranch, which is called Purgatory Auto Works and Dinosaur Farm. We build race cars for the 24 Hours of Lemons and Lucky Dog race circuits. I'm a voice actor. I mainly do commercials and narration. And then I have a bunch of sidelines. I like to take pictures, which is why we're here. I am an avid scuba diver, which has led to some interesting birding opportunities. And thanks to diving, I've also flown in some incredible locations with my drone. Also, I help produce documentaries. Why Dinosaurs is the latest of which. It's a feature-length documentary about why people love dinosaurs. And it was on the festival circuit this past year and did very well. So, that said, a little bit more in my previous life, even though I have a degree in English literature, I started my working life as a network engineer, and then I moved into email systems, and then I was eventually working as a trainer. And I did take fine art classes all through secondary school, and high school, but I sat next to the most amazing artist ever and realized I would never have the patience for the fine details required to do what she did. And now, though, I do have patience, but back then I didn't. And I mention this because that artist, that incredible artist, last year I thought, I wonder what happened to Miriam. So after a bit of web searching, I discovered she's an artist and a very well-regarded one. She's illustrated for the Scientific America, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Her website is miriamdraws.com, and I mention all this because she did those 4 interrelated logos that just popped up of the talking stega, the stega taking pictures, etc. It's pretty cool. So a bit about this presentation as we jump in. Over the years, I've tried just about all the genres of photography: landscape, nature, even aerial and wedding. And my photo journey pretty much led me to realize I like animals. That's what I like to photograph. With that said, this is probably the first bird picture I ever took. It was taken with my grandfather's 126 Instamatic sometime in the 1990s. And then in college, I got my first SLR. Things improved a bit. And then in the mid 2000s, I got my first DSLR and things really improved. And then in early 2020, I joined the Photographic Society of America, and I took part mainly in their nature study group, as well as a couple of their less formal dialogue groups. Both of those, one submits an image each month, and then you receive comments, and one's also expected to comment constructively on the images others in the group have submitted. And the key detail in the nature study group was the emphasis on story. So I wanted to sort of bring that in with these images that show my photo journey as much as possible. That nature study group did shut down very unexpectedly this past summer, and since then I joined the Santa Clara Camera Club and am exploring that. And I might become active with the North American Nature Photographers Group. It just depends on what goes on here at the ranch. So that's my photo journey, that in a nutshell. So basically the rest of the presentation is going to cover the 3 ways I bird. I do the standard birding by foot that everybody does, where you're out, you're walking with a group or on your own and you take pictures of birds. But I also bird by boat and by air. But about 95% of my birding is done from my chair, basically my desk chair that I'm sitting in right now. So the first part of the presentation is going to cover some of the highlights of what I've seen and where I've been, pretty quick. And then we're going to talk about the story of how I ended up birding every day. So to start, a few pictures and stories about birding. Now, my family started vacationing in the Florida Keys when I was very young. In fact, the three images I just showed you, they were all taken on Longboat Key, which little map animation is showing. Once I got a DSLR, I started having a lot of fun. And Longboat, as you can see, is located south of Tampa and north of Sarasota. First off, some pretty simple royal terns in their mating plumage. Obviously, some sort of disagreement is occurring. And I do lie on the ground a lot to take photos, especially at the beach. Here's a simple willet with a coquina or a donax, which is a type of tiny clam. This is another image I took while lying down. Pelican diving school. The youngster is the topmost bird and an adult below him. The adult was repeatedly flying with its youngster in tow. Now, because of the background buildings, this image wouldn't be suitable for a Photographic Society of America competition because they're considered the hand of man, but I still like the photo. And perhaps my very, very, very favorite photo that I've taken in Florida is this lovely little sanderling. It just looks so happy as it was preening basically in that golden hour. So that's how I started. Now I'm lucky in that my partner is originally from Adelaide, Australia, so we visited often. This red line pretty much shows the areas we've been through. There's some other ones, but this pretty much covers it. And one thing I should mention is when we do drive through various sections of Australia, I am apparently the rain goddess, but only in Australia. Because every time we travel, the day before or the day after of our arrival at a location, there's rain. And I'm not talking light sprinkles, I'm talking torrential flooding. These two videos were shot as we drove into Coober Pedy, which is an opal mining town in central Australia. And it rained so much prior to our arrival that many of the homes had flooded out and there were sandbags everywhere. And we'll see more pictures of rain in Australia as we go. This is a very simple shot then in Australia. It's just an Australian magpie, cheeky little monkey. He joined us at a picnic table, and there's a white ibis in the background. Another pretty simple, basic Australian birds. We have a crested pigeon on the left and a yellow-throated miner on the right, and they were just squabbling over tourist leftovers, but there's interaction. You can see that in that miner's face. Then when in Alice Springs, I captured this image of a banded stilt family. The youngster is the foremost one. And this species then served as my inspiration, as I like to make stuff. So I took some simple bargain bin wooden birds that I found at a craft store. And yes, those whistles are my bird. We'll get to him. And I painted these wooden birds to evoke the banded stilt species. And now they live in my foyer. Then on another Australian adventure, we went to Heron Island, which is this little green dot up there in the middle of the frame. Heron Island is part of the southern section of the Great Barrier Reef, and it's very small. It's only about 40 acres. And when we were there, it was nesting season, which meant there were about 200,000 birds calling it home. So you really had to watch your step, as naughty terns like these guys, they don't build sturdy nests, and it's very common for the nestlings to tumble and end up on the ground. Plus, there's a multitude of shearwater burrows that can break your ankle. And it's not just the terns and shearwaters. This silver gull was overheated because he decided, or she decided, to build their nest in the worst possible location on the island possible. It was in constant direct sunlight, and that's why it's overheating, and it was also next to the helipad. And that helipad was actually used a few times while we were on the island, as there was a BBC film crew on the island, and they were shooting a documentary. And yes, that is Sir David Attenborough. I got to share an island with Sir David Attenborough, because he was part of the film crew. And as I mentioned, I am apparently the rain goddess in Australia. This Nankeen heron is from a pit stop outside Newcastle Waters, which is a cattle station in north central Australia. Now, the day before we got to this area, it had, of course, rained a lot. and the dry creek was a raging river. So in addition to the egrets and herons filling the trees, there were also several dozen black kites congregating in the area. This little excursion, though, it really had a big impact on me. This is 2014, because I realized you never know what's around the corner. Even along this tiny, barely sealed, barely asphalted road in the middle of Australia with these huge road trains barreling down past me. And then this is that final shot looking back at that river, and then you can see on the left how swollen it was. So now we're going to jump to another favorite spot of mine where I do bird, and this is the Cayman Sister Islands. Now, I'm an avid scuba diver, as I mentioned, but I don't like cold water. I just don't. It's bad. And I'm very familiar with Grand Cayman because I've been there many times and its dive offerings, but it's gotten pretty busy. So back in 2018, I decided to check out the Cayman Sister Islands, which consist of Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. Little Cayman is the west island, and Cayman Brac is the east island. They're about 10 and 12 square miles respectively, and Little Cayman is about 60 miles east of Grand Cayman, and then that little gap between the two is about 5 miles east, 5 miles in length. And there you can see it in proportion with the rest of the world. Now, during my trips, I started to learn how to bird by boat and air, but which we'll get to lastly. This is a pair of brown boobies flying directly overhead. And the best way to get pictures like this is by boat when that dive boat makes a trip from Little to Brac. Because it takes about a half an hour to get from the east side of Little to Brac, and then when you're crossing that 5-mile gap between the islands, the boobies will come out and follow the boats in hopes of grabbing a fish. This is another brown booby that was flying level with the boat, and this is probably the same booby. And now boats make this trip because there's a purpose-sunk former Soviet destroyer, that's a mouthful. That Soviet destroyer is on the west end of Cayman Brac. It's a really, really good dive site. And this is what a typical dive boat looks like on the islands. And so to get pictures like I just showed you when birding by boat, it's not like I'm sitting in one of those nice calm boats that you see people where they have a tripod and they're all set up and they can just sort of swivel around and take pictures. I end up situating myself on that top deck on the fly bridge, and then I usually throw one of my legs over the side and wrap it around that post for some extra stability. And to make life easier, I have what's called a cotton carrier, which is a vest that allows you to easily attach and unattach your camera to your chest. It's really awesome if you need to climb up and down a ladder. And this is a red-footed booby coming in very low on a calm day. But not all the days are calm, obviously, and it can be fairly bumpy on the boats as they run anywhere between 13 and 20 knots. And so on rough days with swells, it can be really rough. And this is a houndfish, not a bird, but a houndfish, and it had popped up from the boat's wake. Same thing with this flying fish, which was moving out. And I show these because this is what the boobies are hoping to catch. This is what they want to eat. And as one more side note about that vest I mentioned, the cotton carrier, I use it all the time, not just when I'm on a boat, because I prioritize mobility and only use a telephoto lens. I'm not a big person, so a prime lens it's just not something I can easily wrangle to do, easy photography for me. And this one was shot, this brown booby was shot this past July. So the Cayman Sister Islands are key migration points. There are, if you remember, or even if you don't, the map I showed, there are no other land masses between the northeast portion of South America and the Yucatan until Cuba and Jamaica, other than these 3 islands. This is another booby. They're very prevalent on the island. This is obviously a red-footed booby. And the islands are breeding sites for numerous birds, including, of course, the brown and red-footed boobies. But due to human development, it's less of a thing on Cayman Brac. And this is a very cute and inquisitive little red-footed booby nestling. Little Cayman also then has several large interior ponds, brackish water, And these herons were cooperatively fishing at one of the ponds. You can also usually see whistling ducks, osprey, belted kingfishers. You get the idea. And then because Little Cayman has about only somewhere between 100 and 120 full-time residents living on the island full-time, and it's so underdeveloped, it's quite a birder's paradise. And I'm a drone pilot, and when flying across bits of the island, I often see scenes like this with all these lovely little herons and egrets. And a bit about drone photography. I try to be as responsible as possible when flying in remote places like this. This means not harassing the wildlife, keeping my distance. And once in the air, I try not to linger, since I'm primarily interested in video, and the still image, like the one on the previous slide, that's actually from a long video like this, where I just do, I export it as a still image. And as you can see, when I'm flying across the Booby Pond, that is actually what it's called on Little Cayman, there's tons, you can see the little white nestlings in the trees, and they weren't too upset or bothered by me because I was keeping my distance and I just kept going on by. My bird droning isn't intended to get great shots of individuals or groups. It's just nice to see birds being birds as an offshoot of what I'm doing. So that's drone photography. And one last note about Little Cayman that I want to add to plug it is, in addition to all the birds, it's also home to the critically endangered sister island rock iguanas, these guys. Now, this species of lizard is only found on Little Cayman and Cayman Brac, and it's estimated there are less than 800 adults across both islands. It's threatened by human development and automobiles. The larger adults, what kills them is a car or truck. But the primary threat on both islands are feral cats. Yet recently, the sister islands did cull ferals, and when I was there in July, the resulting boom in youngsters in the lizard population, it was wonderful to see. There were so many little ones, which I hadn't seen in years. That's it for Little Cayman. Now we move to the last area, Indonesia. And as a result of diving friendships on Little Cayman, I've made a few trips to Indonesia, primarily to dive, but I have managed to combine birding with diving. In 2023, I visited Tengkoko Nature Reserve, which is on the northeast tip of Sulawesi, which is an island in central Indonesia. It's that red splotch I highlighted there. And when I was on Sulawesi to dive the Lembe Strait, I also went to Tengkoko Nature Reserve, and that's most famous for the black-crested macaques, which are also called the selfie monkey, which if you follow news and photography, there was a big case about. So the macaques and cameras and picture taking. It's also then somewhat famous because of the Gursky's tarsiers. In this image, that leg does not belong to the animal in the foreground. It belongs to the one in the background, but it's still pretty funny. But in Tengkoko, the true stars of the show are the birds. This is a crested hornbill. It's bringing back food to its nestling in that cavity. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous bird. It sounds like a helicopter coming in. And my birding tour was led by a guy whose family actually owns one of the eco lodges near the park. And the tour was arranged by the resort where I was diving. And one fun thing, it did include a boat portion where I was on a traditional fishing boat, which felt a little precarious. And that allowed us to get a glimpse of birds like this great-billed kingfisher. And it was a good thing I had my cotton carrier, as I had to wade into the water to get into and out of the boat. So I just had it there with me and my hands were free and I was able to go. So that day also included a it was kind of strenuous hike through some of the jungle. But this image of an ochre-bellied bulbuk, well, this one was captured, let's see, my feet were braced on two trees as I stood on a pretty steep incline, while the resort staffer, he was basically my chaperone and translator, his name is Snow, he held on to the back of my camera harness as we were standing on this slope. It was worth it though. We weren't in too much danger, but yay for cotton carrier yet again. So obviously, depending on your fitness level, this sort of tour can be pretty strenuous or just fairly strenuous, but it was totally worth it. And I could just keep showing pictures from Indonesia, like this green-backed kingfisher, which we saw, and then a few minutes later, we saw the female. So this is the female, here's the male again, and one more for the female. And one last tangent, like I did with the little PSA for the Cayman sister rock iguanas. In Indonesia this year, when I went back to North Sulawesi, instead of going on another tour of Tengkoko, I was privileged to go on a private tour of the Tasikoki Wildlife Rescue Center. Now, this center specializes in working with animals seized from smuggling operations and the bushmeat trade. And they work to rehabilitate mainly primates like the black-crested macaque and birds like the sulfur-crested cockatoos and some lorikeets. Sorry, I needed a drink of water. So to rehabilitate these animals, they build up viable social groups, and once a safe location is found and established, they release these animals back into the wild as a group. Sharing images and videos of the animals at the center is very sensitive because of those smugglers and bushmeat hunters. These images here are just of their food storage and prep, plus these are their food enrichment offerings. And I took them to share with the Wildlife Center of Silicon Valley, where I volunteer when I have the time, which lately I haven't, and I feel very bad. Oh, and this is one image I can share because these lovely little red and blue lorries, they were actually in a holding area prior to being transported and released at some undisclosed location. So, I forgot. There's one more thing about Bali, or about Indonesia. On my trips to the island of Bali, so the red dot in the middle is Sulawesi and North Sulawesi, and the dot in the bottom is Bali Island. And when I've been on Bali, I usually stay either in the southern section on Unggasan or on the northeast at Ahmed. But I have birded while there at the West Bali National Park, which is how I saw this adorable sleepy nightjar. Now, because I was staying far from West Bali, getting pictures like the nightjar and this lovely little black-thighed falconet, it's not a trip for the faint of heart, because to reach the park and my guide, I was up and on the road at 2 a.m. But it was so much fun, I did it again this year, and that's how I saw this lovely little Javan banded pitta. And then again this year, I was treated to the West Bali, it's the bellwether bird. It's the Bali starling or Bali myna. This bird is critically endangered, but thanks to the conservation efforts, they're mounting a comeback. I probably saw about 20 while I was on West Bali this year. So I don't do crowds or group events often. I should say that because I just don't do crowds. And I prefer one-on-one outings. That said, I have learned that it's easy to photograph birds wherever you are. You don't have to go on a trip just to see birds. You can go birding, just as a side note to your trip. So if you're going somewhere new, I look online for what species will be in the area. I may search for a guide, or I'll ask locals if they have contacts, and then I just go. Sometimes things fall through though, and that's how I saw this cute, well, not cute, but he was lovely. He was a little egret. He was fishing the Jurcones River, which is in Mexico. This and this yellow-winged cake, they were both taken at the Botanical Gardens of Puerto Vallarta. And the quick story for that is I was on a cruise. And yes, I did just say less than 2 minutes ago that I don't do crowds, but this was a work thing, and I was on a boat. It was okay. Anyway, I'm on this big boat and I want to get off it and see these ports, specifically birds. And that day I had arranged for a guide in Puerto Vallarta, but things fell through. So I looked online, I found out about the gardens, and I got off the boat. And at the taxi stand, I found a driver who was willing to, take me down to the botanical gardens and stay with me until I was ready to go back to my boat. And it wasn't very expensive, so that wasn't, it wasn't a deal breaker. And then I just spent that morning exploring the hiking trails, and then I had this great lunch. Yes, that is a margarita. And yes, there were a lot of silly rock piles down at the Jarcones River, but I knocked all the ones I could down. So on this cruise, our next port was Manzanillo, and that's where I saw this lovely little vermilion flycatcher. My guide this time didn't flake on me. We had a lovely time. We drove up to Naranja, and we saw things like this green-cheeked woodpecker and this cattle egret sitting on a horse, not a cow. And let's see, oh yes, we saw a merlin. It was a lifer for my guide, so he was ecstatic. And then an ani, which I will never get a good picture of an ani. They're just impossible. They're ground birds. They don't move. And when they do, they just move back behind like the horse or the cow they're standing near. One more little tidbit about this trip, proving that you can bird anywhere. This was taken from a shallow bottom boat at the next port. Crowded. This was the one port excursion I did with other people. Took my camera, just why not? It was on my cotton carrier on my chest, so it's not like it was a big deal. And this, like I said, this was taken in Mexico, in fact, in Mazatlan. And yes, if you remember those ports, I did Puerto Vallarta, Manzanillo, and Mazatlan. I was on the Love Boat. Yeah. But images like this one and this shot of these pelicans, and you can see the fish they're squabbling over, it just made me realize, yeah, I can take pictures anywhere. I can still do it. Another image to drive the point home. This is in Giverny, France. We were at Monet's studio. These are house sparrows. Remember, we're in Europe. They're native. And they were having their little cuddle. And as Shri and I were talking about Ohio earlier, this is a pileated woodpecker across the street from my parents' house. So that's, like, in a nutshell, some of the fun places and the cool things I've seen lately. But after all of that, as I mentioned, 95% of my birding and bird photographer is done from my office, and it's done from the chair I'm sitting in right now. So now the last half of the presentation is going to talk about how that happened. Back in 2015, I call it the big boom. And because that's when Purgatory AutoWorks and Dinosaur Farm was basically born. And so to tell that story as quickly as possible, because, oh man, it could go on and on and on. We were living in San Francisco. Remember I mentioned I did try aerial photography. And so this is a shot of the Golden Gate, not a bird. But we had spent 2 years trying to find a house, and we had some pretty specific requirements. First, we wanted a very large garage because, as I mentioned, my partner builds cars for the 24 Hours of Lemons race circuit. And, we needed space for that. And we also wanted a pool that you could actually swim in, not just like a little puddle. And the really hard thing to find was the garage and the pool and a house. And the house did not need to be set on fire to become livable. We got really close a few times. We'd find the garage and a pool, but then the house would have something terribly wrong with it. So in the end, this is what we ended up with. This is our garage. And this is how I became, a birder from my chair. And because this garage came with so much more than we ever anticipated or intended. It came with a 50-year-old custom mid-century modern house in the middle of 14 acres. And we're halfway up a mountain. Now the house was built in '66 for a couple of doctors and their 3 kids, and we're only the 3rd owner, though, of the property, so a lot of it is still quite original. But the people we purchased from, the middle owners, they weren't really good on preventative maintenance or trash disposal. So we had a few problems, which we'll get to. First off, in 2015, when we moved down here in, this was probably July or August, the previous owners, instead of paying to have fire breaks mowed, because it's such a large parcel, we have to put in fire breaks, they allowed a sketchy guy to put his horses on the land and eat the grass. The problem with that is This is what our south pasture looked like after that. Everything was grazed to dust. All you see here are stands of star thistle, and the green stuff is tumbleweed. That's all we had left, which meant that next spring we ended up with this, which is mustard grass that's over 6 feet tall. And in this shot, my partner Mike is actually standing on the tractor as he's mowing a path down the hillside. And it took us years to recover and get our grasses back. Now, keep in mind, when I took all these images in 2016, we were very inexperienced in semi-rural living. And we had just spent the 8 previous months dealing with the huge projects, like removing all the piles of trash left behind. The first 2 years we were here, I filled 20, 30 cubic yard dumpsters. No joke. There was a lot of garbage. I think 25 years worth of Christmas trees got chipped. We had tons of old fencing material, and we had to deal with it. And so these shots of that same pasture I showed you that was all overgrazed before, this was done right before we refenced. But we did recover. And so now this is what that hillside looks like. It's green, it's lush. We still have a few stands of weeds, but we've gotten most of them down. We also have some coyote bushes and a few oak trees that have volunteered themselves. It's pretty awesome. And here it is. This is our north pasture area on the other side of the property. Now, we achieved these results by mowing early to take out as much of that sprouting mustard grass as we could so it wouldn't dominate. And then we do a targeted spraying with a broadleaf herbicide to get the star thistles. And if we're out and about, if you find a star thistle, we just grind it with our boot and get it out. And that's been fairly effective. What are we? We are 8 years on when this was shot. And there's Mike admiring the handiwork. So backing up a tiny bit before we get to the birds, back in 2016, I attended a nest box talk by Mike Azevedo. And then 2 years later, after some serious badgering on my part, SCVAS hooked me up with a Boy Scout. And as his Eagle Scout project, he built me a bunch of nest boxes, and our first boxes were installed. We had 10 to start. Now we have over 20 boxes scattered across the property. And in nesting season, about 75% of the boxes see successful action. Mainly we get western bluebirds and house and bewick wrens, but we also get tree swallows making use of them, as well as flycatchers and nuthatches. And this box is interesting because it shows a common occurrence. 2 different species made use of the box in one season. A western bluebird on the bottom, and then when they were done, a wren, probably bewicks, moved in. And don't worry, we clean and repair all this every fall and winter, so nests like this don't stay around. And then we use Nest Watch, which is part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology offerings to track our data. We only track our boxes. It would be way too much to, even with help, to monitor all the mockingbirds and orioles and jays. We just do our boxes. And then 3 years ago, instead of faffing about with a mobile phone and trying to put it in a box after I'd open it to get a picture of what's in there, I invested in some borescopes or endoscopes, and I was very, very happy with the results. The most successful option is a $30 depth stec. That's the brand. It connects via Bluetooth to your phone or tablet. It's primarily made for car mechanics. I was the one that started using them, though. We don't use them on the race cars. They don't usually have a need for it. But anyway, then I used some spare PVC, the white thing that's not included with it. The PVC is my addition to it, and that made it into a staff. And so now I have my trusty cotton carrier there on my chest again, and with the iPad mounted on the cotton carrier, I'm like a reverse Teletubby, and then I can use my staff and shoot it up there and get into a box. And the wonderful thing about it is so not invasive. And as you can see, these lovely little tree swallows, they don't even notice or care that I'm checking in on them. So it was a really, really great little bit of invention. So speaking of boxes, we're going to do a hard transition. I mentioned that our custom mid-century modern house is 60 years old, and true to mid-century modern, you can see here it's very boxy, and we have over 120 exterior panes of glass. So once we started making all this progress and getting our grasses back and bringing in birds with nest boxes, we had a new problem. Birds flying into the glass, which we don't want to have that as a problem. So after exploring some options, we ended up going with kaleidoscope tape, which you can see here. This is an example of one of our problem windows. We looked at other options, but because we have incredibly high winds in the winter, where we can easily have sustained winds over 40 miles an hour, and our gusts can go over 80. So that's why we went with something that affixes to the windows. So this is what it looks like from the outside. Here's that same space when I really tried to focus on the tapes from the inside. Once you're in the space though, because of the way your eyes focus, you don't really notice the tapes. And it really does work though. So we only did that one room, the great room, and then my office here, because those were the only windows that birds were hitting regularly. We still don't have any problems with any others, and if we did, I would tape them. Now today, a bird strike unrelated to our Cooper hawk or Cooper's hawks is very rare. Our resident small hawks do try to use the windows as a tool to score a meal. They'll try to run a bird into it to stun it. So I can't mitigate for that, but I can mitigate for, birds just not being able to see our windows. And then one more thing about windows, which leads into how I take pictures. This was the original view when we moved here, minus there was no table, but we had this deck outside my office. But we knew underneath that deck was our septic tank, and the septic tank had failed. It had a collapsed baffle wall. We knew this from inspections. So we ripped out the deck and a backhoe came in. It was from Able, our preferred plumbing service. And we replaced the septic tank. And then this ended up being the view outside my office. This was late 2015. And then in January of 2017, I got really, really busy, and I gathered up all the bathtubs that were scattered about the property back from the first owner. And then I put down some gopher netting just to do some weed barrier, and we do have pocket gophers, so this was to help with them. I brought in some topsoil. I purchased a bird bath, as you can see there. We'll come back to that. And in the background there, that dinosaur, I got that from the estate sale of Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. It used to be in Carrie Fisher's garden. Her name is Marie. Anyway, when I was done, this was outside my office. And then now, this is what it looks like. You can see some birds right there moving along. So we do have a YouTube stream. I'll provide details if you're interested about that, where we do stream this area. But it is a very happening place. And then also, in addition to all this work, in early 2016, even before the garden was planted, I started taking pictures of what I saw here, like these owls in our barn, or a barn swallow. He's kind of blurry, isn't he? Yeah. A barn swallow leaving the barn. Little battles fought between native and not native. Or just, something outside my garden window. This little mockingbird was sitting up above in a tree. And then I started posting those images to one of my websites, and I still do. And 4 times a day, every day, a new image is posted to this site. And to date, I have posted over 8,000 images. And the coolest thing is, I'm taking pictures of the same birds across months or even years. Like, take these red-tailed hawks up here. I'll show some detail shots in a minute. These are all the same 3 hawks. Actually, it's primarily 1 hawk and 2 mates that she had over the about 5 or 6 years I've been taking pictures of her. Here I'm assuming it's a she. Here is that same hawk on a pole. We have an old pole on the edge of the house yard that used to be at the part of a horse structure. And it's a primary spot. Our raptors love it because they can see all down into our south pasture, plus they can see behind them into the house yard. And it's not just the hawks who sit there. Here's a little kestrel on that same pole. So the site's tag cloud, that contains the species that have been photographed the most. And I have documented with photos well over 100 species. And while, let's face it, the majority of these images would never be suitable for the Photographic Society of America's nature group or nature competitions because, you know, there's the hand of man everywhere. The collection does show the daily comings and goings of birds and other creatures, just being birds and being animals. And that, I love it for that. And that, going back to that first image that was at the banner of this presentation, is how this came to be. All these birds, and you can see there's a few non-birds, like there's a dog and a deer. All of these came to that bird bath in the garden. That's the same bath in every single picture. Excuse me. So this image was actually created for a jigsaw puzzle. And in fact, you could have one of these puzzles. We'll get to that later, but yes, we're running a small contest a contest and a donation event, where if you donate to SFBBO, you can get one of these puzzles. Details will be at the end, and I can provide a link if you're interested. So we're going to start wrapping things up with turkeys, because we get turkeys too. You may have noticed we have bird feeders in the garden. We have several feeding stations elsewhere as well. Now we use a variety of feeders and provide a variety of food. Mainly we use a couple of hull-less seed mixes as that cuts down on the mess, but we also use suet, mealworms, and nuts. These three later additions really keep our jays as well as our fox squirrels from eating the offerings meant for smaller birds. I should also mention, because water is a scarcity here, we only have one family of fox squirrels. We don't have what you would have down in the valley, where you'll have like multiples and you'll see like 5 or 6. We have a pair, and every year, twice a year, they have some little ones, and then the little ones move out and we just have a pair again. Now, for our tube feeders, we use some acrylic baffles. You can see them on the right across the top. And that not only keeps rain off the feeder, but it also keeps bird feces from landing on the feeders and into the food. And then, since we have ginormous herds of quail, plus California thrashers and other ground birds, we also use the poles surrounding baffles, not to keep squirrels off, but to keep bird poop off the ground, because all of this helps minimize the chance that diseases will spread. Then we have a semi-industrial setup in the garden shed where feeders can be thoroughly washed. And then we have a duplicate for every feeder. So as one feeder is washed and is drying, another can go out. That way we minimize the risk of any infection spreading. Now, if a bird with some sort of infection does show up, we don't remove all the feeders. We just continue cleaning. We found that seems to be the best way to do it here. So more shots of the shed. Another shot of the shed. It's a very popular place. And lastly, for birding, here at the ranch, we have documented by photos over 100, but thanks to the birdweather.com PUC and the Haiku box, we have documented well over 120 species. Now, these are Internet of Things devices that will help ID birds. They both use the BirdNet API, which is again part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Now, I like both of them. They have different applications and interfaces, and I have done like a full review/breakdown, which you can find on our ranch site. We'll get to that at the end. Using these devices at the ranch has taken my birding to a whole nother level, because you can set notifications for specific species that have been detected. So in this case, I'm trying to get a picture of a golden eagle. So every time the golden eagle enters our airspace, I get a notification on my watch through the Haiku box. The problem, though, is, as I mentioned, we have red tails. So every time the golden eagle comes in, I get a notification, and by the time I find it, the red tails have run it off, and it's this teeny tiny little speck. I'll get lucky one day, though. but I do get lucky sometimes. This kestrel from earlier, here's another shot of it. This same thing happened. I got a notification on my watch from the haiku box. I ran, I grabbed my camera, and I got a shot of it. And the same thing is for this lovely but blurry yellow-green vireo. Obviously, this is never going to be put on my website, but I did get a picture of it. And now you may want to avert your eyes because not all sightings are happy ones. I've been getting sapsucker, all 3 species of sapsucker notifications for the last 2 months. And this is how I finally saw it 2 weeks ago. It was very sad. That is one of our resident, that's a Cooper's, yes, I think? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it had taken out the sapsucker. Now, if this had been a cat, there's a chance the sapsucker might have made it, but we're okay with birds eating birds here. So I love these devices so much. I've given them away to past guides. I'm helping fund and get a pilot program going in the Caymans to better record migratory bird data. They're just awesome. You got to try them. They're so cool. So summary. We're almost to the end. Hang with me just a bit more. If you want to do what I do and bird all the time, get a chair, put it by a window, and have your camera at arm's reach. In this photo, my camera is sitting on that cute little pillow right there. It's always next to me. Then buy 2 of the same bird feeder. That way you can wash one and let it dry. And find a feeder style that's going to work for your setup. If you only have a balcony or a tiny outdoor space, maybe go with suet or a hummingbird feeder. Then buy good quality seed. Stay away from stuff with a lot of dust. Pre-hulled is awesome. It reduces mess. It attracts less pests. It attracts less pests. That's hard to say. You can see we use storage bins in the shed, and this prevents rodents or deters rodents more than anything. We also pretty much, I think everything except mealworms we buy from Los Gatos Birdwatcher. It's a little far for me, but totally worth it. Then lastly, put out water, keep it clean, and the water offering doesn't have to be fancy. This that you just saw that skunk fall from is just a little old pot on a plant stand connected to an irrigation hose and timer. And when we realized that little skunk was using it and having these problems, we built some steps. This is a trail cam footage so that they can get up there and use and get to the water. And 2 other things you should take into your planning. Control your cats. Domesticated or feral doesn't matter. Back in 2016, when this was shot, we were TNRing or trap, neuter, and releasing resident ferals. Obviously, though, it wasn't effective. And then, don't be a light polluter. At night, direct your exterior lights down, not out, and only use them when they're needed. Because birds really, just like us, they need sleep. And then the last footnotes. I don't just live with birds all around me. I share my house with these 2 grumpy, well, right now they're actually behaving themselves quite well. There is no screaming or shouting for me. On the left is a Tenar. He's a blue-fronted Amazon, and Thyli is the Congo African gray. They're both in their 20s. And so they've dropped a lot of feathers, and I keep their feathers, and I make stuff like these masks. And then I donate the masks for nonprofits, and they use them for fundraising. Sometimes I make silly things like feather flowers, which just add a bit of color in the house. And the boys, they do enjoy the outdoor birds. They especially, they loved it when we had, for about 4 months, we had a couple of orphan turkeys from the Wildlife Center that we released here as a safe spot because we usually have a flock. And that's how this image happened, which I used to use as my avatar. And that's a turkey sitting on Murray, which was the dinosaur that formerly belonged to Carrie Fisher. And then I've used this image and others to make little sun catchers, which I then donate to nonprofits to use for fundraising. Sometimes I hang them in my house. We have these unused cabinets in the kitchen, so I cover them with pictures or just load it onto an iPad. That's an old iPad, and it does a slideshow. Mainly I do all of this because I think it's important to enjoy all this life here at the ranch that we've helped foster. And so every bird is basically everywhere all the time here at Purgatory. Whoops, and I went too far. Oh, no, I didn't. This is the last shot. Our work isn't done. We still have projects in the works, like we need to re-landscape around the house. We're going as native as possible. And this last shot is not a bird, but indeed a badger, because we do get badgers here. We've done well enough in our restoration projects that we get badgers, and so we're very proud of that. But sadly, all I ever get are badger butt shots. Yeah, this is the best one I've got. So that's it. Ways to connect is the last slide. If you want to head over and check the 8,000 images from the ranch and the wildlife, the site is stega.org. My other photography can be found at networkgirl.org. That's where pictures like of the Australian and Indonesian birds. My Instagram and YouTube. Then we have our ranch blog is at purgatory.org. And if you're really bored, my drone site, my scuba diving site, if you need to hire a voice actor, there's my demo is at boros.net. But if you can't remember all of those, the easiest way is to hit up Stega, Doggy, and Tree. And yes, that's another logo designed by my friend Miriam. She just finished it 2 weeks ago for me. Okay, that's it.
Wow. Wow.
That's
What
great.
a story. What a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was fun.
Oh, so much fun just listening to you actually, and the excitement in your voice. It was really awesome.
We don't live a normal life.
This is amazing actually. And converting everything to, you said native, which is fascinating, and then
Well,
getting backward.
the problem is a lot of the landscaping is original to the house. So we want to get rid of a lot of the hardscape and
Mm,
do more plantings. We're also bound because we're in the state responsibility area for Cal Fire, so there's certain things we have to do there. But yeah, we want to basically plant natives and get as much. The only caveat is I want one non-native thing. I want a real lilac bush. That's it.
ah.
Just one.
And maybe I just didn't notice, but you get a lot of hummingbirds too then. In-
Yes.
ah,
In fact, the Garden Stream cam it does a cycle when well, right now I have to run new PoE cables, but that's another story. And there's one camera that's pointed at a hummingbird feeder suction to my window.
mm,
So you get really up close. So it cycles through the various camera views.
and do you get a lot of hummingbird nests that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of,
Yeah.
I'd have to go looking.
Ah, yeah. It's such a
There,
such a I mean the landscape and the naturescape you have around just feels right for bird nesting, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And we have enough hummingbird feeders that they can't be super territorial.
Yeah.
And then
You th we would think.
yeah, they managed. I mean, in
Yeah.
this garden next to me, there are there's probably 8. Some of them are just tiny little pots, and
Mm,
some of them are larger. And we make sure we mix that in because we do get bullocks and hooded orioles in the spring and
oh,
summer. Our record is 6 pairs. And so we switched to an oriole feeder, but the hummingbirds can use that too.
wonderful. Wow. So maybe we just do a backyard bird shooting in your backyard. Um,
Well, I do usually host a birdathon group,
yeah, you do.
and it was suggested last time that it used to be bird in the morning and then come here for lunch. It was suggested instead, just come here and bird. So I think that's what we're going to do this year. People just
Mm,
get to come up here and bird, and then we have lunch.
well, that's wonderful. And you said 100 odd species, right? So it's just amazing.
In residence at any one time, we have 40 at least.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And we don't get things that you would think. We don't have crows. I mean, we've
Oh,
detected them and they've flown by. We have ravens instead.
mm,
We don't have house sparrows, but we do get all
interesting.
3 goldfinches.
Oh, I saw the Lawrence. Yeah. saw the
Yeah.
Lawrence in one of your photos there. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Wow.
And people are always amazed. Thrashers are just they're ground birds here. They're just here. The California thrashers.
Incredible.
Lots of
Incredible.
work. Lots of work.
It's lots of work, but yeah, thank you for doing this. And also thank you for sharing. This is just a different level of birds and bird photography. So very, very cool.
But anyone can do this. Remember that. I mean, even if you're living in an
Yeah.
apartment and you're like, oh, just put a hummingbird feeder out.
Yeah. Yeah. We ripped up our front yard about 5, 6 years ago. The lawn was useless, and we ripped it up and just put native plants. And I mean, just the turnaround for birds and bees now is amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You see
Quite,
bobcats or foxes at your home too?
We have foxes and bobcats. We do not have, that we know of, often mountain lions, thankfully.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool that you have badgers too.
Oh yeah, we're
yeah,
so happy about the badgers.
yeah. What a cool way to bird, actually. This is just fascinating. And also you travel, so this is like a whole thing. But like you said, 95% of your birding was in your backyard. This is
From right here,
fascinating.
from right this chair, all I do is turn. Because that window I was showing and that view, right now it's dark, so I can't turn on a camera and show you. But it just
So
turn and shoot.
you shoot through the window then, huh?
Yes. We
Ah,
keep it very clean.
okay, okay. But because if you open the door, they'll just fly away then. That's
Well, there's no door out. I would have to go that way and then out.
ah, got it,
But yes, I
got it.
shoot through a window. Double pane,
Wow.
double glazed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting.
But see, I'm not joking. The camera's right here.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Questions? Any questions about the sites you visited, or you know, to me, it's the way you bird from sea or from a rocky boat, and
Ah,
just from boats. But my God, it is hard.
it is.
Yeah,
It's a workout. My abs will be tired.
the red-footed boobies and beautiful looking bird actually. Fascinating.
Oh, and I love that. I love when you can go places and they have like fricate birds and boobies because they're such fun. They're fun to say.
Yeah.
All right, I guess folks are done.
Tony said beautiful photos, and I'm getting questions coming up, but I and Amanda says the same thing.
Yeah, I saw.
So I'm going to send this recording out, and it's going to be online, obviously, right
I
out there.
can't. You're breaking up, Shri.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was saying that the recording is going to be online soon in a couple of days at least. And then if people can want to reach you, is the website the best place to do that?
Yeah, the easiest place to go is, like I said, is Stega, Doggy, and Tree because then it's a page that has all the links, it has email contact, it does everything, and you can get to all the sites from it.
Awesome. Awesome. All
It's yeah,
right.
it's the collector.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on your YouTube. Fascinating to see so much there. So,
I just posted our end of year video, which is a tradition here. There are sharks in it,
oh wow.
and a nudibranch. Oh, the cutest nudibranch ever.
Re from the Bay Area?
No, no, the shark
Oh,
was in the Caymans, and the nudibranch was in Ahmed, Tulumban. It was just Indonesia.
wow.
But I'd never seen a nudibranch eat before, and I got to, so that was really cool.
Wow. Hey, that's okay, folks. If no further questions, then
Thank you all for staying. Thank you all for attending. Hope you enjoyed it. Now go buy a bird feeder. Go buy two bird feeders.
oh,
Two.
yeah, oh, actually, that's a good plug-in. So you said sorry, you said a Los Gatos.
Los Gatos Birdwatcher, Lisa's store.
right?
Yeah. And they have
I
staff there that can help you sort of find feeders, which is really great.
she's a fantastic birder. I really enjoy going out with her as well.
Hmm.
Yep. Excellent. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Yep. Yep.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night then.